Welcome to this week's episode of Reading the Gospels Through Hebrew Eyes. Then we have an interesting text to look at this week. It's from Luke chapter 8. It's also recorded by Matthew as well as Mark. It's a story of when Jesus goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the eastern side, and encounters this crazy guy. He's possessed by all these demons. He's living in tombs. He cuts himself. He's been chained up. He breaks the chains. It's such a kind of an outlandish portrait of this guy who just appears to be enmeshed in evil. And I think it's held up for us because it seems like if there's anybody beyond the reach of Jesus, it would be this guy. And yet that is the very one whom Jesus frees. He cast out the demons. The demons end up in the herd of pigs. The pigs go down the cliff in the Sea of Galilee. Now, there's a lot of stuff happening here. There's a lot of Old Testament background. So we're going to jump right in by, first of all, looking at the geography, make sure we know where we're at. So this is Luke 8:26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. Now, right away, if you are looking at the various translations, and especially if you look into the Greek, you'll notice that there's basically three different variant readings here as to where this is at. Some readings have Gerasenes, some have Gadarenes, some have Gergesenes. So there's a lot of disagreement over exactly what this place is to be called. And you can check out the commentaries if you're really into that. But the main point that is clear is that Jesus is on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and thus he's in Gentile territory. So that's going to be a dominant theme here because there's all sorts of Gentile uncleanness. It's part of this narrative. Also, keep in mind, what happened right before this? Well, Jesus calmed the sea. Now, that's important because we've talked about this in a number of videos. In the Old Testament, the sea is emblematic of what? Of the unruliness of the world, the chaos of the world, the confusion of the world, often linked with the Gentiles and the Gentile leaders. So Jesus has just, as it were, brought peace in the midst of warfare. He's brought calm and order in the midst of chaos. Then, immediately after that, he demonstrates his power over unruly nature, if you will. Right after that, now he's going to confront evil. He's going to confront the persona of chaos itself in these unclean spirits who possessed this man. So that's where he's at. Let's see what happens when he arrives. So this is Luke 8:27. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time, he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. So this is the beginning of this portrait that we have of this guy. We know that he's demon-possessed. We know that he's walking around without any clothes on. We know that he doesn't live in a house. He lives among the tombs. Now, already we're in unclean Gentile territory. And now we hear about this man who's not only possessed by unclean spirits, but he's living in an unclean place. Because, as you know from your Old Testament, death, a corpse, that's a major source of uncleanness. So if you touch a corpse, you're rendered ritually unclean. So already we're getting this feel for just how unclean this story is going to be, how many elements of uncleanness and purity are going to be present here. Now, let's take a look at the rest of what Luke has to say, and then we'll also glance at what Mark has to say as we get a bigger picture of this particular man. So this is from Luke. We have highlighted in yellow what we just read, but if you look down to verse 29, where we kind of have a flashback, as it were, this narrative flashback in parentheses, where we read that many a time it had seized him, that is, the unclean spirit had seized this guy. He was kept under guard, bound with chains, with shackles, and he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Now take a look at what Mark adds. Mark talks about how he was, living in the tombs, and nobody could bind him, not even with a chain. He'd been bound. He wrenched the chains apart, broke the shackles. Nobody was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day he lived among the tombs, and on the mountains he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. So when you compare Mark's version with Luke's version, you get a complete portrait of this guy who just seems to be living, experiencing a living hell. Literally, he's possessed by demons. He's harming himself. He's been bound with chains, but even those he breaks. He's on the mountains crying out. He's living among the dead. It's just a horrible, horrible situation that this guy's in. Now, if you're following the lectionary, depending on which lectionary you follow, there's a chance that your Old Testament reading is from Isaiah 65. Now, take a look at how Isaiah 65 pulls together some of the themes, some of the images that we just saw in connection with this man. So this is from Isaiah 65, 1 through 5. God begins talking about how he was sought by those who didn't ask for him. He was ready to be found. He's stretching out his hands, saying, "Here am I," to a nation. Now listen to how this nation, how these people are described. A rebellious people, that is, they're living contrary to God's ways, walking in a way that's not good. But notice this language in 3 and 4. They're sacrificing in gardens. That is to say, they're sacrificing in places not acceptable to God. This is pagan worship, illicit worship. And then, even more, verse 4, they sit in tombs. They spend the night in secret places, and they eat swine. They eat pig's flesh. So it's kind of fascinating where, if you look at what's happening in Isaiah 65, God's description of these unclean, rebellious, idolatrous peoples, that actually dovetails with some of what's happening with this man in Luke chapter 8. Now notice everything kind of coming together. It's kind of a constellation of chaos that's happening here. You've got all sorts of uncleanness. You've got the unclean land of the Gentiles. You have this man who's possessed by unclean spirits. He's living in unclean places. He's living in the tombs. And then you have the unclean animals that are coming up here in a minute. You have the pigs. And you're also going to hear about the abyss, which, as we'll see in just a second, is connected in the Old Testament with this place of disorder and the realm of the cursed spirits. So all of this is kind of coming together. You're getting this mental image of everything wrong with the world in this one story. And that's what Jesus is going to confront and what Jesus is going to overcome. All right, now let's see what happens as the story progresses. This is Luke 8, 28 and 29. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Now, we looked at these verses just for a second earlier. Let's look at a couple more details. For many a time, it, that is the unclean spirit, had seized him. Now, the Greek there is soon arpazo, which has this idea of not just kind of just a seizing, but a violent seizure. So it violently seized him. He was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, but he would break these bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert, the eremos. Now, I don't know why the ESV translates this word differently in different parts of the gospel. It is the same word used in Luke 4, verses 1 and 2, to describe how Jesus was led by the Spirit in the wilderness. Now, here it's translated desert in Luke 8. In Luke 4, it's translated wilderness, same place. The background here that's important for us to realize is that in the Old Testament, beginning already in the story of the 40 years of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness, but in a lot of other places as well, the desert or the wilderness is the haunt of dark demonic forces. So it often becomes metaphoric for that place of death, that place of rebellion, that place of uncleanness, that satanic realm. In fact, if you look at the liturgy for the Day of Atonement, for Yom Kippur, you have a goat for Yahweh, but then you have the goat for Azazel, which in the past was translated as scapegoat. Goat for Azazel. Now, who is Azazel? Well, according to Jewish interpretive traditions, he is a demon who lives in the wilderness, in the desert, and that's why the goat for Azazel is sent out to him. And that's, of course, also why Jesus goes into the desert to be tempted by the devil. So the desert or the wilderness is often understood to be this demonically haunted realm. And that, of course, is where this guy ends up very often. Now, another phrase here is, "What do you have to do with me?" That's what the demon says to Jesus. Now, this is actually a pretty common Greek idiom that's drawn from the Hebrew. There's Hebrew instances of this, and then it comes into Greek several times in the Gospels. Now, I have these highlighted for you on the screen. It's in Matthew 8:29, which is the Matthew's equivalent to what's happening here with Luke. Mark 1, Mark 5. Now look, it occurs twice in Luke. Luke 4:34, and then here in Luke 8:28. And in both cases in Luke, it's the demons who say this to Jesus. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Or in Luke 8, the one we're looking at today, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Then the demon begs him, implores Jesus not to torment him. Now, what is implied by the use of that Greek verb? Well, the verb itself is basanidzo, and it occurs also in the book of Revelation. So if you go to Revelation 20:10, we read about the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be basanidzo, tormented day and night forever and ever. So there's a connection here between what this unclean spirit is asking from Jesus, don't torment me, and then what's going to happen eventually to them, all unclean spirits, when they're cast into the lake of fire. Now Matthew, interestingly, in Matthew 8:29, has a little bit of an addition here. He has him saying, why have you come here to torment us before the time? Saying, as it were, listen, we know there's going to come a time when we're all going to be cast into the lake of fire in basanidzo and tormented there. So have you come to, as it were, begin this process already now? But in Luke's version, he simply says, don't torment me. Don't torture me. Instead, he's going to ask for something different. Now, let's see what that something different is. So this is Luke 8:30 through 33. Jesus then asked him, what is your name? And he said, Legion. We'll come back to that in a minute. For many demons had entered him, and they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there in the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. Apopnigo could also be translated choked or drowned. That was their fate. There's a lot going on here. By the way, in my trip to Israel back in February, I stood on the traditional site where this may have happened. There's a cliff that falls over the Sea of Galilee. It's very easy to imagine. It was actually one of the highlights of my trip. Very easy to see how the herd of swine would have gone over that and then plummeted into the sea of Galilee. Now, what's this legion business? What's this all about? Well, the Greek there is actually borrowed from the Latin. So legion in Greek comes from, it's a Latin loan word, legio. This is from Howard Marshall's Luke commentary. He says, the man answered legion, a Latin loan word, meaning a legion or a regiment of soldiers. The word expresses the man's feeling of being inhabited by a multitude of evil spirits. The continuation of the story in Mark 5 indicates that some 2,000 spirits are envisaged, although a legion was normally about 5,000 to 6,000 strong. I think the reason that legion is used here is just kind of in a metaphorical sense, as it were, a ton. That's our name. There's a ton of us, and not just one evil spirit, but a whole legion are inside this poor man. Now, what is their request? They beg not to be thrown into the abyss. Now, what's happening there? Well, in Greek, it's abusos, and in Hebrew, this is where it gets fascinating. The Hebrew word that is the equivalent of this is tehom. And you can see there that it can mean flood, it can mean deluge, but this is where things get very interesting. So when you go back to Genesis 1:2, it says there was formlessness and void, and the Spirit was over the face of the tehom, the deep. Now, tehom is often used in the Old Testament, and the Greek equivalent of that is the abyss, as this place of death, this place of punishment, this place of chaos. So the dark, deep waters. In fact, tehom is often personified to where God has to conquer the tehom, the chaos, the deep. Now, that Old Testament background becomes important for understanding what's happening here with the word in the New Testament. I got a great comment here from a resource that I go to every single week. It's called the Commentary on the New Testament Use of the Old Testament. And here's the quote. The word for abyss is an adjective, bottomless, that came to be used as a noun meaning bottomless pit. In fact, as a side note here, when we talk about something being abysmal, like an abysmal failure, that's the way we're using this, as it were, unfathomable, bottomless. So that's its background. It's used in reference to deep places, and there's your Genesis 1:2 quote, deep places in general and deep waters in particular. And you have the connection there with the flood. It also came to be used to refer to the realm of the dead. And in Jewish literature, this usage is extended to refer to the place for the fallen spirits, such as in Jubilees and in 1 Enoch 10 and 18. In this context, he's talking here about Luke 8. In this context, it refers to the deep waters that are considered to be the place for the demons. Now, what's going to happen? They're going to end up going into the abyss, as it were. They're going into the Sea of Galilee. But that's kind of the background here. The abyss is another name for the place of eternal punishment. And it has its roots all the way back in the Old Testament with Tehom, that place of deep waters and darkness and destruction. Okay, now let's wrap up the rest of this. This is 34 through 39. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then people went out to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been sozo, healed. That's translated healed here. That's where we get our word saved. So in the Bible, both New Testament and Old Testament, saved often has a double connotation. It can mean literally physically delivered from something, translated here as healed, right? But it also has this meaning of being spiritually delivered. So when someone is saved, we also always have to ask ourselves, were they talking about actually a physical rescue or a healing rescue or a spiritual rescue? And sometimes it has the connotation of both. I think that's what's happening here. He's saved in a double sort of way, both physically and being rid of the demon, healed, but also spiritually and coming to faith in Christ. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. So notice the differing response here. So the people are afraid and they want Jesus to leave. Now, there's all sorts of theories as to exactly why they wanted Jesus to leave. Some people say they wanted to get rid of him because they just lost all these pigs. They just lost all these animals that were their livelihood, possibly. Or maybe their response was the kind of response that Jesus often got. People didn't want anything to do with him. So they asked him to leave. They asked him to depart. We're not told exactly what their motivation was, but we do know that fits the description of so many of Jesus' hearers. Some believe and come to him. Some want him to be gone. That's the case of these Gentiles. Now, the man himself, what happened to him? Well, there is a remarkable, complete transformation of who he is. So when Jesus got there, there was a man who came out of the city with all these demons, and then they found now they find the guy from whom the demons had gone. And for a long time, he wore no clothes. He's walking around naked. And now they find the man clothed and in his right mind. He hadn't lived in a house, but in tombs. And now where's he at? He's sitting at the feet of Jesus, and he is told to return home. Now, sitting at the feet of Jesus is the posture of a disciple. In fact, later rabbis would they would describe being the disciple of a rabbi as sitting at his feet. So this man is sitting at the feet of Jesus. He's now clothed. He's now free of the demon. He's in his right mind. And he is a follower, a disciple of our Lord. And as we see, what he really wants to do is to go with Jesus. And why would he not? Of course he wants to go with Jesus. He's just done he's given him a gift that's beyond comprehension. He delivered him from a living hell to now where he's a new man. He's free to the demons. He has hope and he has life. He has healing. He has all of these good gifts that God has given to him in Christ. But that's not what Jesus has planned for him for his future vocation. He says, no, I've got a better idea for you. I want you to go home and I want you to go and tell people what God has done for you. So this guy becomes really what has sometimes been called the first apostle to the Gentiles. He becomes a preacher, telling people of what Christ has done for him. So he's a disciple, he's a preacher, he's an evangelist, he's an apostle, which just simply means a sent one, going to the Gentiles, proclaiming to them what Jesus of Nazareth has done for him. Now, there's a really cool thing that might be easy to miss here. So look at what happens when Luke tells this story toward the very end. So we read, the man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. And what does he do? Well, he goes away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. How much God has done for you, how much Jesus had done for him. This is Luke's subtle way of reminding us exactly who Jesus is. Jesus says, tell everybody what God has done for you. And the man who's been healed, who's been saved, who's now been sent out to preach, he tells everybody what Jesus has done for him because he realizes there's only one person who could do what that man had just done for him, and that is God himself. So a really cool way that Luke tells us about the divine identity of Jesus. Now, there's a lot here, so let's kind of pull it all together into a couple paragraphs. Jesus boldly comes into the realm of everything unclean, confronts and conquers evil by casting demons into the abyss, mercifully delivers one utterly beyond the help of others, and transforms him into an evangelist and apostle to the Gentiles. And that means there is no sinner so enmeshed in this world's chaos, overcome by a strong or pervasive anti-God force, in the grip of a powerful or enslaving sin, who's beyond the pale of Christ's merciful deliverance, whom Jesus will then use in the service of his kingdom. And that's great news. And I think that's why Matthew, Mark, and Luke all wanted to make sure that this story was recorded. It's an extreme story about a man in extreme straits, in extreme uncleanness, just about as bad as things could possibly get. And when Jesus shows up, takes care of him. No problem, because he's the God who comes to save, to deliver, to defeat the forces of evil. And it doesn't matter how bad they are. Jesus is always stronger and more merciful and more gracious. Great news for this man. Great news for us as well. That's the good news of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. And that is Luke chapter 8. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. If it has, please share it with your friends. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks.